Trump's legal team walked out of the courtroom today wearing white smiles as the jury delivered a stunning verdict that has left the political and media landscape buzzing. After weeks of relentless arguments and high drama, the former president's long-standing battle with the Department of Justice came to a dramatic end. In what many are calling a complete legal and political humiliation for federal prosecutors, the jury returned a not guilty verdict on all counts. The courtroom erupted in gasps as the foreperson announced the acquittal, marking one of the most high-profile setbacks for the DOJ in years. The case, which had captured national attention for months, centered on allegations that Donald Trump had unlawfully interfered in government processes and abused his power after leaving office. Prosecutors had portrayed the former president as a reckless leader willing to bend the law for personal and political gain. But after listening to weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and evidence presented by both sides, jurors appeared unconvinced. As the verdict was read, Trump leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and nodded slightly, a faint smirk crossing his face. His attorneys immediately patted him on the back while a few of his supporters in the gallery wiped away tears of joy. One of Trump's lead attorneys, who had faced constant media pressure and intense scrutiny throughout the trial, later told reporters outside the courthouse that justice had finally prevailed. He accused the DOJ of using the legal system as a political weapon and declared that today's verdict was not just a win for Trump, but for every American who believes in fairness and the rule of law. The Department of Justice, on the other hand, appeared shell-shocked. Its lead prosecutor stood silent as journalists surrounded him after court adjourned. Sources close to the DOJ said officials were deeply frustrated by what they viewed as a jury swayed more by political sentiment than evidence. The department released a brief statement saying it respected the jury's decision but stood by the integrity of its case. Privately, however, several insiders admitted that the result represented a serious setback for Attorney General Merrick Garland's broader efforts to hold Trump accountable. Political analysts immediately began dissecting the implications. Many described the verdict as a massive blow to the Biden administration's credibility, especially as critics have accused the White House of quietly backing politically motivated prosecutions. Although administration officials have repeatedly denied any interference, the optics of the DOJ losing such a high-profile case against Trump are damaging. Conservative commentators wasted no time celebrating, calling it proof that the so-called deep state had overplayed its hand. Cable news networks cut into programming to deliver breaking updates, replaying clips from the courtroom and reactions from outside. On right-leaning channels, jubilant anchors declared that Trump had been vindicated once again. On liberal networks, the tone was more somber, with commentators expressing disbelief that the jury could overlook what they viewed as overwhelming evidence. The division reflected the nation's ongoing political polarization, where every development in Trump's legal saga becomes a battlefield for public opinion. Trump wasted no time capitalizing on that victory. Within hours, he appeared at a rally in Florida, his first public appearance since the verdict. Standing before a massive crowd of cheering supporters, he declared that the truth had finally won. He accused federal prosecutors of running a witch hunt and said that they had just been laughed out of court. The crowd erupted as he promised to continue fighting what he called the corruption and weaponization of the justice system. He framed the case as part of a broader attempt to silence his political movement, but said the people had spoken through the jury. Campaign aides said the acquittal had injected new energy into Trump's 2025 campaign. Fundraising sites reported a sudden surge in donations immediately after the verdict was announced. Social media platforms were flooded with celebratory messages from Trump's allies and voters. They tried to destroy him, but they only made him stronger, one supporter wrote on X, formerly known as Twitter. The phrase quickly began trending as pro-Trump accounts posted memes and videos mocking the DOJ. For the Department of Justice, the loss will likely trigger internal reviews. Officials had invested significant resources into building the case, believing they had a strong chance of conviction based on witness testimony and internal communications. But the defense team successfully attacked the credibility of key witnesses and cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. Several experts have noted that the DOJ's strategy may have backfired, as it appeared too focused on painting Trump as a villain rather than proving specific legal violations. One former federal prosecutor described the trial as a masterclass in how you overreach can sing a case. The DOJ came in swinging hard, but they forgot that jurors are people, not pundits, he said. They needed to focus on facts, not politics, and legal commentators agreed that the jury's quick deliberation, reportedly less than 9 hours, indicated that the prosecution's case had not resonated as strongly as expected. Inside the courtroom, several jurors appeared visibly unmoved during the closing arguments from the prosecution. Observers noted that they seemed more engaged when Trump's lawyers highlighted inconsistencies in government documents and testimonies. When the defense pointed out that some of the evidence was circumstantial, jurors nodded slightly, suggesting they were unconvinced by the prosecution's attempt to tie Trump directly to specific illegal acts. Following the verdict, speculation immediately turned to whether the DOJ would attempt to appeal or pursue related charges. Legal experts say that while an appeal is technically possible, it would be difficult given the clear acquittal on all accounts. The department may instead shift its focus to other pending investigations involving Trump, though today's outcome could make it politically risky to proceed. On Capitol Hill, reactions fell sharply along party lines. Republican lawmakers celebrated the verdict as a victory for due process and a repudiation of what they called a politically motivated witch hunt. House Speaker Mike Johnson praised the jury for seeing through what he described as a baseless prosecution. Democrats, meanwhile, expressed frustration, warning that the acquittal could embolden Trump and his allies to continue undermining democratic institutions. Some members of Congress hinted that they might push for an independent review of the DOJ's handling of politically sensitive cases. Political strategists said the acquittal could reshape the upcoming election landscape. Trump's rivals within the Republican Party may find it harder to challenge his dominance now that he can claim legal vindication. For the Democrats, the result could force a rethink of how they approach the narrative around Trump's alleged wrongdoing. Some fear that repeated failed prosecutions could fuel public sympathy for the former president, portraying him as a perpetual target of an overreaching government. In the days leading up to the verdict, Washington insiders had been bracing for potential unrest, with security increased around the courthouse. However, celebrations remained largely peaceful. Crowds of Trump supporters waved flags and chanted slogans as they gathered outside, while a smaller group of protesters decried the decision as an injustice. Law enforcement maintained a strong presence, but reported no major incidents. Internationally, reactions were mixed. Several foreign media outlets described the verdict as another example of America's deep political divisions. In Europe, commentators noted that the acquittal could complicate diplomatic relations if Trump returns to power, as some leaders have privately expressed concerns about his unpredictable style. In Russia and China, state media highlighted the verdict as evidence of political turmoil in the United States, using it to criticize what they see as the instability of Western democracies. The ripple effects of today's decision are expected to stretch far beyond the courtroom. Political fundraisers, campaign strategists, and media outlets are already recalibrating their approaches. Analysts say the acquittal has re-energized Trump's base and potentially shifted momentum heading into the next phase of the campaign season. Whether it translates into electoral success remains to be seen, but one thing is certain, Trump's political comeback just gained new life. Critics of the DOJ argue that today's verdict should serve as a warning against politicizing the justice system. They say that by pursuing Trump so aggressively, prosecutors inadvertently strengthened his narrative of persecution. Supporters of the DOJ counter that the department had a duty to investigate and that losing one case does not mean others will meet the same fate. Still, within political circles, there is growing concern that continued attempts to prosecute Trump could backfire, further dividing the nation. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., reporters scrambled to gather reactions from across the political spectrum. Former aides, legal scholars, and activists all offered differing interpretations of what the verdict meant. For Trump, the answer was simple. "We won," he told a crowd of supporters before boarding his jet. "They tried to break us, but we stood tall. They laughed at us, but now the joke's on us." The phrase quickly spread across social media, symbolizing what his followers saw as poetic justice. The same DOJ that had once pursued him now found itself ridiculed in the court of public opinion. Trump's inner circle reportedly plans to use the acquittal as a centerpiece of his campaign messaging, presenting it as definitive proof that he has been targeted unfairly for years. Meanwhile, inside the Department of Justice, morale appeared low. Several career attorneys expressed disappointment at how the trials are being handled, saying that too much emphasis has been placed on making headlines rather than building a tight legal argument. Others defended their colleagues, arguing that any case against a political figure as polarizing as Trump was bound to be an uphill battle. The long-term consequences of the verdict are still unfolding. For now, Trump walks away legally free and politically invigorated. His opponents face the difficult task of convincing voters that accountability still matters in a system many now view as deeply partisan. In a single afternoon, a courtroom decision reshaped the national narrative once again. Whether it becomes the defining moment of Trump's comeback or merely another chapter in his tumultuous saga will depend on what happens next. But for today, one image captures it all: the former president walking out of the courthouse, smiling broadly as cameras flashed, while DOJ attorneys quietly gathered their papers and exited through a side door. The message, at least for now, was unmistakable. The jury had spoken, the case was over, and the Department of Justice had been, as Trump put it, laughed out of court.